All right, and welcome to the podcast. I'm going to call it what it is. We've known each other for 7-8 minutes here. I've seen flowers delivered at your house. This is something that I found this in your podcast. I found this in parts of your book. I found this just this warmth and heart to you.
Aww.
And I really saw that. And I also saw this. These are the parts that I want to dig into. And I as I shared this before, audience, you're just coming along in our conversation here. There's parts of Anne's book, Bet on Yourself, that I saw and I'm like, ooh, I want to dig deeper. And I want to dig deeper because you've worked in the tech world. You worked in the tech world for 16 years. You worked in that world, which was kind of a lot of bravado in the tech world. And yet I see this warm, kind, soft, vulnerable person, Anne, who I've kind of gotten to know through a little bit of a book and podcast. And, now getting to share this opportunity where you get flowers and just how you care about yourself. And yet this challenge to almost step into a role that you weren't sure if you deserved. Did I lay the groundwork, the framework in that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like that's very generous. I appreciate that angle. I'm so touched and grateful that came across this. I really wanted, while my story can often feel larger than life and otherworldly and outside of most people's experiences, given the cast of characters and what they grew into, what I wanted most was it for the book to feel very, very relatable. Because what I'm trying to do is really take the playbook of the greatest hits, the best practices of these people who seem like super performers and rock star, literally like wealthiest, most powerful people in the world, and translate it for us normal people. To use my career as a case study to show you that this doesn't just belong with the elite. This belongs with you. And if I can do it, literally anyone can. So I'm so grateful that human, vulnerable element came across when you read it and you felt that kind of connection. That means everything to me. So I'm really just thrilled.
So, yeah, to catch up the listeners that maybe haven't read your book yet, maybe don't know much of your story, you started with Amazon, early 2000s, when Amazon was just a shell. They had not really existed at this, global giant that they are today. And you got to work with Jeff.
I did. It was, not only did I work with Jeff in the foundation of the company at the beginning of the internet itself, but I sat at the desk literally physically closest to his in the entire company as my very first job after undergrad. The overwhelm was real. I think a lot of naivete served me well during the interviewing process, because had I fully appreciated what was ahead of me, I would have been appropriately terrified. But I didn't really know any better.
Well, he wasn't a larger than life figure at that point.
He was a minor celebrity in Seattle. He had been Times Person of the Year in 1999. So he was a known thing, but Amazon was not yet profitable. They had one profitable quarter, not yet a profitable year at this point in 2002. And everything was just based on faith in Jeff, that he would become, that this vision would translate, that he would be able to innovate better than anyone else. But yeah, when I was hired, we were in a single building, 15 stories in PacMed, a former hospital on this hill overlooking downtown Seattle. Now Amazon literally has over 1 million employees. But back then it was, 1,000? So it was really just this tiny infancy of an idea of something that may or may not catch on when I started.
So, I mean, I haven't looked yet in my notes, which they're hidden behind the screen, which I'm great, because that means it's like good conversation here. It's like there's a part of me, as you mentioned this, and there's people that get to know Jeff. There's people that spent time with Jeff who, almost held his life in their hands at one point. I'll let you get into that, or you can read the book. We read the book and find that out. But what I want to know, and this is a question that just hit me right before we got started. Was it the tenaciousness of Jeff to make this happen? Or was it his ability to really compel others to the vision, or a combination of both?
I do think it's a combination of both. There's something very, very special about Jeff. He is a little bit different than the average human out there. Absolutely. People ask me all the time, is this nature or nurture? Like, was he just born to be this person? He was exceptionally smart. Even as a very young child, he was identified as just like off the charts, like smart and intuitive and thoughtful and a fast learner. So he has some nature to it, but it was nurtured into him through his family life, his home life. He really learned to make things greater than the sum of their parts. So it was nurtured into him. But most importantly, not only had he been curated into this super performer, but he was able to then create a group of like-minded, capable people who, let's be honest, none of us had any idea what we were doing in the beginning. It wasn't that I, as the junior most person in the company, was the only one who was making it up as I went. I saw that modeled for me by senior vice presidents, because we were literally inventing the future. We were doing things every day that we hadn't done before and nobody had ever done before. And so he was able to translate those traits, that tenacity that you're describing, and institutionalize that into the culture of this infant company that he had founded. And that, I think, is the very special element.
So, I mean, I think now, if Jim Collins were to write Good to Great in 2021, going into 2022 now, if he were to write Good to Great, where kind of Amazon, in essence, would fit there? Because to me, there's a part of leadership. This is a leadership podcast. This is to empower leaders our age, in a few years younger, plus or minus, how to lead through these situations now that it's our charge to lead, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you saw some of that, exposed to that. Now we're here. And one of the things that I picked up there, and this conversation was not meant to dwell on Jeff Bezos by any means, but it's also what you just shared with me, is he did a phenomenal job of not only having the acumen himself, but creating an environment that people wanted to play along as well. But you just said, having these people involved in the room like you were, that had no idea what they were getting into, but rise and develop and perform and create that banner and carry it. To me, that's a leadership testament that we can't underscore enough.
I couldn't agree more. I honestly think this is a part that first-time founders overlook. They're so focused on the traditional elements of a business plan, of product market fit and being first and, all that kind of the what and the how. But absolutely the thing that I've seen is the common denominator between those companies that just survive and those that thrive is the who. Assembling a team of like-minded, passion-aligned people who you can ask to sprint a marathon, because they're so passion aligned that the work pulls them rather than exhausts them and tears them down. And that is a really big differentiator. Being able to inspire a group of people to run at that pace for as long as you have to create something this exceptional is a differentiator. But it is curating that group, and that is the only way that you as a founder can continue to carry the load. You just have to be able to replicate yourself throughout that team. Yeah.
So, to kind of move the story along here, to have some more depth to our conversation, because we could spend, the next 20, 30, 40 minutes talking about that, because to me, there's so many elements to look back and analyze. You left Seattle, you moved down to the Bay Area of California, you end up getting a job at Google, but there's a stop in there. There's a stop in there because you were going, you wanted to be classically educated. As there's an aspiration, I think, of the younger Gen Xers, the older millennials, our generation. They're just like, oh, we need to go to college, because some of us were the first generation. Yeah. You were aspiring to get your doctorate, and then you pulled the plug.
I did, to my parents' continued horror, honestly. And my original dream was to be a professor. I was a very serious kid, actually, so I just thought the greatest job on earth would be to read and write books for a living. And I just really love learning. I love leaning into things I don't understand and just having deep intellectual conversations and debates. And so that was my original plan. When I applied to Amazon, I had no intention of having a long career in tech. I just wanted a quote unquote real job before I went into academics, which is more theoretical than the applied, right? So that was the whole point in working at Amazon at all in the beginning. But then, yes, I followed that original dream. I got into my dream PhD program, moved to California and started my program at Berkeley. And then shortly thereafter, Google came calling and eventually talked me into trying out tech one more time. I did not anticipate, when they finally convinced me to come to campus for a tour, that I would then be at the company for the next 12 years. But yeah, I absolutely fell in. It was love at first sight, honestly.
Yeah. So why is that? What from your experience at Amazon and what you saw in there and then to Google, what was kind of like, oh, this is what I've been missing? Because there had to be that, right?
There was. I mean, I had hedged my bets a little bit. I'd love to make it sound like I was so brave and I just left tech. It got in my blood immediately. Like I was hooked. So when I left Amazon, literally the last email I sent from my Amazon account was to Udi Manber, who had moved from Seattle down to Silicon Valley to head A9, which is Amazon's search engine that they use for doing all that predictive recommendations that get us to buy everything. Udi was now the president of A9, and my last email I ever sent from that account was being like, hey, I'm coming to the Bay Area. I'll be there next week. If you ever need help with some special projects, let me know. And he replied immediately saying, the second you arrive here, come see me. So I had been working at A9. I kept a little bit of that tech in my blood. I went there every Friday afternoon to help him with some projects. And I had anticipated I would miss the pace, but a more accurate answer to your question is the people. It goes back to me of every time. It's like that quality of people. I love the way they think. I love their innovative approach. I loved their attitude around failure and learning and pivots. And once the Google recruiter finally, after I think the fourth or fifth call, trying to convince me to interview, and he talked me into just coming to campus, that is what got me to say yes to interview. And that campus tour, and I share in the book what that day was like, I ended up sitting at lunch between Vint Cerf, who's one of the original creators of the internet, an astronaut who had literally been to space, and a cyclist who had ridden on the post office team with Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France. Whether by design or accident, I found myself surrounded by these super performers, and that is what I miss. Not because that doesn't exist in academia. It absolutely does. I love the conversation we were having and the important conversations that we were talking about, reading and writing about. But there's something about like the pace of technology and that kind of mindset of these super performing people that immediately I was like, okay, this is my tribe. I need to come back here.
You know, I think for me, as I sit on that and I think about it, it's the classic proverb of iron sharpens iron. And once you start to get sharpened, and once you understand the sparks are good, then you yearn for them. You really want to be, sharpened and almost challenged. And I'm an Enneagram 8. I don't know if you know your Enneagram.
I think I'm
a
3. Oh, honestly, I don't have this memorized, but yeah, I'm not an 8.
That's all right. You're not an 8. But I mean, to me, that's that challenging, that like curiosity, that inquisitive, that wanting to go deeper. And there's elements there that 3 connects. I'm not an expert. Don't get me wrong. I know a little bit. I'd have to, reach out to Ian again, who previous episode to talk about it, and like give me some feedback here. But I just see that because I have had the luxury to be in an environment and culture where it's like you're going till midnight and you're up again at 5. And it's invigorating, and it is the people you're around because you're continuing to layer to where it's not belaboring. And I've just gathered from you, that's what the cultures, not one of them, both cultures were very much of that element.
You're exactly right about that. Your instincts are spot on. It was a culture where nobody asked me to work 100+ hour weeks. No one asked me to come in on the weekend, ever, not once. But I did it voluntarily because, honestly, I didn't want to miss it. I didn't want to miss the moment where they figured out that really hard problem, or I didn't want to not be present in that war room when we were trying to patch some kind of security issue or solve some really important tech problem. I just didn't want to miss it because it mattered to me. I felt so aligned with the mission of what we were trying to do at both companies. At Amazon, watching not only e-commerce be invented, but the gold standard of e-commerce was such a privilege, and I felt it from day one. And then at Google, I was really, really committed to the idea that organizing the world's information and making it not only universally accessible, but useful could literally change people's lives. I saw that so much later. Fast forward 15 or so years when I was with Eric Schmidt, the then CEO in Africa, and we saw mobile technology being the only access to information for remote communities. I saw villages using it for weather information, for when to harvest their crops. I saw women having their only access to education being through mobile technology and learning, or their health information when someone was ill. And I literally, that connection to me of improving the quality of people's lives, especially marginalized communities, really lit me up, and I just didn't want to miss it. I wanted to do anything I could do to add value to that. Now, I'm also, I do want to say, like, I am such a fangirl, and I know these people and this mission so well that it can come off as hero worship. I just want to add here that there is a note of, I know the weaknesses and the flaws of all these people and companies equally as well as the best practices, but I do find, in the most part, it is most helpful to share what those best practices were. But yeah, I'm also very aware that there's two sides to every coin.
So let's take a side that way, because one of the things that not to, I agreed, I'm not, and I don't revel in page 6 gossip. It doesn't matter. We all have, as I like to say, and as someone previous guest said, is we all pee and poop.
Yeah.
Everyone gets up to pee at 3 in the morning. It's like, get over yourself. But one of the things that I want to take there is you made this, like, you were injected into the passion at Amazon. And then you came to Google and you're around the same type of people and you're injected by it. So you're driven by it. Well, you had the opportunity to lead groups. And as you know, we're talking today about leadership, and as you coach other leaders and CEOs, and now we're coming into a different generation. Because I would say the plight of our generation, again, this older Gen X, this younger millennial, children of the late 70s, right? Can we say that and be okay with it? I'm aging myself, not you. I'm bald.
I know. I'm
look,
late 70s.
Yes.
I'm a late 70s baby.
Is the fact that work was our drug of choice in a lot of ways. And now we're coming into a generation, and we're seeing in our society today, as I talk to so many people, they're like, they don't want to work overtime because they value their life outside of work so much. And so as a leader, as we're sitting here and as you think about, as you led some of those, younger partners as well, how did you either accept that they didn't want to be there for the same things you wanted to be there? Or how did you inject that into them that they were so engaged, they were there along for the ride too?
Do we have 10 hours? I have a lot of...
We got as long as you want. I mean, we could do an episode 2. We could have another conversation because, again, I'm going to say this because it's fun to me, is I haven't looked at my notes yet. So I have no idea, but we're just having a conversation.
I have a lot of strong feelings about this. So I'm trying to organize my thoughts of like where to start and how to do this succinctly.
Just throw spaghetti on the wall and see what falls.
So my first reaction is you can't inject this. People have grit, tenacity, and drive, or they don't. However, I think most people have it, and it hasn't yet been tapped into effectively. So I think the large percentage of the population has something that lights them up. And this is actually my favorite part of this next generation's leadership. They're not going to just take any job and take the orders and the work that, punch the clock and do the 100-hour plus work weeks that their law firm requires or whatever. I love that about them. The advantage of them being like, convince me, is that we have an opportunity to wake that up in a way that maybe other leaders or mentors haven't yet. I love the silver lining, I think, of the pandemic in general, whether you're Gen X or whatever I am. I think I heard it described as like geriatric millennial is actually what I am.
So I call it Zennial.
Okay, Zennial.
Yeah, that's my turn.
I like it. Okay.
You can use it.
I'm going to steal that. I love it. So us Zennials is, yes, I was born in a generation, like, look, my parents are farmers. I'm first generation non-farmer. It's like,
Same
right?
here.
Like work, like if you didn't plant it, sow it, preserve it, harvest it, it's not showing up on your table. That's the people, that's the generation I came from, and that's the work ethic instilled in me. There's downsides to that as well. That is also why my dad's generation have all had heart attacks. My grandfather had multiple heart attacks before it eventually took his life. Like that we don't need to carry forward, I don't think. And now as an American living abroad in Europe, I often describe my move from Silicon Valley to small town Spain as culture whiplash. It very much was. But now I so appreciate that there is this element of actually enjoying your life. So going back to my point of like, I do think this is inside, this is inherent in each human, but we do need to be more purposeful as leaders of how to tap into that. First, not everyone's going to have that same passion alignment. Not everyone has the same definition of that cause that pulls you instead of you pushing it. So I think my first step is, are you hiring for that? Literally, this is something I've done with almost every single one of my CEO consulting clients is we look at their hiring questions and say, Does this stem from the actual values of your company, the passion, the mission alignment you want to see from your employees? Are you interviewing for that? Second, are you incentivizing accordingly? Are you just hitting number targets, or are you hitting like mission targets? And so if you screen for those people in the hiring process, you're going to find those people who are lit up by what you're trying to do. When they're already internally lit up and motivated, it's so easy to incentivize. It is exhausting as a founder or a leader to try and push your team for very long. Like pushing that rock up a hill every day, you're going to burn out. Your team members are going to burn out. Nobody's going to be happy. That's not a good culture. But when you hire for it and incentivize from it and let people be there because they just don't want to miss it, that's so much easier to be successful. And it's still really hard to be a founder and a leader. But then I think that gets us over that hump. So I object to the general concept that the new generation doesn't work that hard. And I appreciate that it does take a little bit more work in the onset to find that alignment and to ignite it. But once you do, I think they're equally unstoppable.
To me, I think, where you started that off is that everyone has grit and tenacity and passion in them. It's just understanding where it's at. And that's the great opportunity of leadership. And I think as we start off this, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you just woke up an idea in my head that I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but
I saw the lights go off. If you're watching the video, you saw it, and if you're not, too bad, you need to watch the video, but you just saw her. Oh, there's a moment. So go ahead.
Well, I just lost my train of thought. So it was like,
oh, my bad.
You were talking about, we're lighting it up, we're igniting it, we're finding our thing. Gosh, dang it. Like the light bulb went off and then it like immediately lost power.
That's my bad. My bad. I'll come back to what I was saying. And once it comes in, just hop in.
I will. It will come back to me in just a sec. Yeah.
Everyone has grit and tenacity and passion in them. And it's our great opportunity as leaders is to uncover that and find that. And I think one of the great opportunities is, I'm going to go back to your experience. You're sitting in the office in Redmond. You're sitting there. You're working beside Jeff. You're working on this door that is a desk, as the story goes. And all of a sudden, if he walks in one day and is like, Ann, this isn't the place for you. I see the grit, the tenacity, the passion you have. You need to be over there.
Yeah.
And just think if that would have happened, and I'm just making this story up, but how much reverence would you have for him for recognizing that you might even say, yes, but that's for later. I want to be here because you saw it in me. To me, that's our great opportunity as this generation of leaders, is not to dictate and demand you have to be here and you have to show up and you have to do this work with excellence. It's taking the time to say, all right, I invited you onto this team because I saw that. I saw that effort, that willingness, that wanting to be there. But now I see it blossoming in a different area. How can I bring that on, which ultimately may enhance our entire team exactly like we need?
What a gift that would be. While I have worked with people I consider the greatest managers and leaders of our generation at a minimum, if not more, that has literally never happened to me. So that conversation where they come to me and say, Ann, I've noticed this untapped talent of yours, and I was thinking about how to utilize that. It literally never happened. That was on me. When I came to them with my observation of like, hey, I think I could contribute something outside my job description or far above my current seniority level, but I think I could be helpful and I'll figure it out. They said yes. And that is the exceptional leadership. Because I see so many people right now wanting to level up, especially when they see companies floundering and pivoting anyway. And they raise their hand and leaders are like, yeah, no, like this. And that usually happens more in like legacy companies where they're so entrenched in their policies and they're primed for disruption. Yeah. They're less embracing of when employees raise their hand like that. But great leaders lean into that and say, yes. When I started managing team for the first time, this was part of my hiring conversation. Was what do you want to learn here? What expertise will you leave this next section of your career with? Because that informed me as a leader to be able to know what should I be looking out for that I can throw their way that maybe I wouldn't have considered them for otherwise. And I think that's something that easily any leader could do, even if your team is small, your budgets are very limited, you don't have a lot of room for failure or a long runway to be playing with. When you early discover that passion alignment and then you can open those doors for them they can't open for themselves, that is the most fun I've ever had as a leader and manager, for sure.
I think that's our great opportunity is as I look forward this torch to carry to help people, help leaders, help, new executives find that, as opposed to feeling like they have to fall into the trap of a previous generation of, just put so many restrictions on that this is the only way we operate. And the problem is you might find some people, but you're also going to exclude a lot of people that can bring your organization to a different level. And you could grow in areas you didn't even realize. And I think that it takes so much, personal humility to say, my job is to help steer this and guide this and not look at me.
And I think a great way of doing that so many leaders miss is just giving people that psychological safety to try some stuff they're not going to be good at in the first time. I definitely learned that in my first role at Google when I was working for Marissa Mayer. At the time, she was VP of Search Products and User Experience, which is a long title that just meant we made really cool stuff. Other people figured out how to monetize it, but we just made the stuff that is now entrenched in our daily lives, like maps and image search and voice, search, all that kind of stuff. But Marissa really taught me that being ready to take on a challenge like that and raise your hand for something outside your current expertise, it means you're ready to just try it. It doesn't mean you have to be ready to do it perfectly. And that's because she sought that out. She encouraged it. She gave me the room to play with. If I had a curiosity about it or a talent or I just wanted to explore it, she gave me the leash to do so. And that's where I think leaders can, just in expressing, it's okay if we're learning really fast and moving quickly and you break a couple of things on the way. Like, I'm here for you as long as we are all moving towards that same North Star. Your job as leaders is give that common definition of success, which is that North Star, and let your people be innovative in their approach of how to accomplish that. And they'll probably come up with things that you wouldn't have thought of yourself that are better than those traditional solutions.
Love it. All right. So another big pivot here and I think this fits in. For me as a early 40s male and looking at this world, and I come back to this title, Bet on Yourself. And one of the things that I picked up, and I almost felt like this coming out in the words and coming out as you speaking it, is I was having to bet on myself because no one else was. And I think there's a tremendous amount of virtue to that. But I also believe, as the world that we're in today, that people shouldn't have to feel like they can't bet on themselves. And one of the things I picked up, and why I'm prefacing this, is previous guest, a cardiac anesthesiologist, and she were talking and I about this, is that, if you have a male, candidate, if they're qualified 6 out of 10 times, they're going to apply and say, I can do the job. Yep. And yet a female, they're either 10 out of 10 or maybe 9 out of 10, and they will actually feel like they could do it. Who knows if they'll apply? And so I felt that just undergirding this. And again, it's a world that I'm not aware of, but I'm seeking it, and I want to understand it, and I want to help be a better leader. And that's why I love this conversation. And again, the opportunity to vulnerably ask you is, how much of that was felt in this world that I better bet on myself because all the chips are against me, because that's the way that the structure has been set up. And that's what I want to know deeper there is, like, if you're sitting here and you're talking to the 23-year-old Anne and saying, you're going to face some barriers that probably shouldn't be there, bet on yourself. Did I read that right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. It's interesting because it's a common question I get, is because so much of my career, I was the only woman in the room. Like the majority of every single day, I was the only woman in the room. And even now, as a consultant and I go in to negotiate some things, I'm often the only woman in the room still. And this is 2021. So it's not like that's been overcome. With that said, it's not like and maybe it's, again, kind of my naivete. I forgot very quickly I was the only one. I would notice it immediately when I came in, and then I would let it go. I don't know. So it's not like I felt like I had something to overcompensate for, over to prove, necessarily about gender. I did, and maybe because education has always been very emphasized in my family, I did feel that insecurity around the fact that I didn't go to an elite. I didn't go to MIT, Stanford, or Yale, or Harvard like everyone else in tech did. I went to public schools always. My, all the way through high school was public. My undergrad university was public. Even my PhD, even though Berkeley's a top 10 university, it's the only public top 10. And so I did have that kind of inferiority complex that came from that. I did find that it actually gave me this advantage because I was constantly trying to overprove my value. It made me hustle a little harder, do a lot more self-imposed homework, test out my ideas to exhaustion, to be sure that my instincts were correct. So I actually think that what could have made me feel like an outsider was my greatest strength when I overcompensated for it and leaned into that and didn't let that insecurity set me back, but it fueled me in proving myself and hitting my goals anyway. I describe in the book that held me back in my early life. I was so afraid of being, that imposter syndrome moment where you're discovered of like, you shouldn't be in this, advanced class in like whatever chemistry or something. Like that for me was built up this skill that became my greatest strength. And I got known for being the one who was always at the right place at the right time, asking the right questions, assembling the right experts, because I didn't just rest on believing that my ideas were the best possible. And so I kind of had a village approach to shoring that up. Is that?
Yeah, no. Yeah, totally. I mean, I love that aspect of it. And it's, you through essence of like, I'm not going to get handed to me. And I don't gather in this. And maybe it's, again, the ideology that your parents had. Again, if you want to revert back to that, and I think that's something I appreciated is, growing up on a farm and, it's like, hey, no one else is going to do it. So you better figure out how to do it. And if you don't figure out how to do it, well, then it's not getting done. And then that's a problem. And, that can be a big weakness. I will have to admit that's been a big, because it's sometimes hard to ask for help. Yeah. And, it's understanding, hey, I'll just figure it out. And I think that's where ultimately in that, and again, this title, this idea, this thought, I better bet on myself, because if I'm not betting on myself, no one else is. And yet if I could bet on myself, then other people are going to be more willing to bet on me. Yes. And I think that again is such the again, underlying, and I look at that from a leadership perspective of being able to instill that in others. Like, hey, bet on yourself, because I want to bet on you. But if I bet on you and you're not betting on yourself, and we're playing out the words a lot, then neither one of us have gotten anywhere. Yeah. And I think it's interesting as I'm thinking about the concept. For me, it's not so much of proving other people wrong. Like I didn't enter a room thinking like everyone here's underestimating me. I really got to show them. It was, to your point, it's proving to myself, like that's not their job, actually. I think that was my approach, which maybe is a differentiator. That I didn't consider that someone else's job. It was my job to discover this untapped talent, or to polish out, let the pressure turn my coal into a diamond, strength. I always considered that my responsibility. And maybe it is, my farmer heritage, or maybe it's being the oldest of 7 kids and like, hey, you're going to have to forge your own path real quick. I'm so grateful for that, because it very much led me, even in the earliest moments of my career, to purposely put myself in the driver's seat, because I did not assume someone else was going to drive this bus for me. Like I had to throw myself up there, and we were going full blast from day one. It was like pedal to the metal, and it wasn't going to slow down. So I wanted to be in the driver's seat. I found that empowering. Which brings in a challenge. As I said, my weakness at some point, and this was a defense, was I just put my head down and push. But at the same point for you is how did you learn to involve others? Because anything you accomplished didn't happen because Anne just did it. It happened because you involved and enlisted the work and everything else of others. How did you develop that skill? Well, first you make me laugh because you're reminding me of the very hardest part of editing my book. So versions 1 and 2 of the manuscript were kind of more about content and flow. And version 3, the hardest edit my editor at HarperCollins gave me was, you need to go in there and remove 90% of the we's. This is your book. You're the expert. This is your story. You're the authority figure here. That gutted me because, to your point, everything I did was we. Everything was a team effort. Everything was assembling the right minds, the right creativity. And so please, if you read it, like go in and insert 90% more we's. Because that's how I wrote it. But I think I did it, one, because I knew that I couldn't just rest on my own laurels. I felt like I was
so lucky and so blessed to just have a seat on this roller coaster. I really wanted to prove my value. And the only way I could find to make up that difference fast enough was to assemble my team of experts. And I think I'm just naturally collaborative, maybe because I come from a big family, but it is kind of my comfort zone. A lot of people, I think the people who lead in the spotlight, who want all the attention and only volunteer for the sexy projects that are going to get them all the credit, they actually burn bright, but they burn out really fast. And I saw that over and over again, especially in the early years of the internet. I saw people doing that. They wanted the results now. They wanted the credit now. They wanted the promotion now. And I recognized very, very quickly that does not have the longevity that I want. And so I was playing the long game always. I would volunteer for the seemingly undesirable task because it was going to teach me an expertise that I could see being beneficial in the long run. I would run war rooms and teams to learn how to use the best sum of all of our parts to, really accelerate it. So one, I think it's my nature. And secondly, I watched it modeled around me. The greatest leaders, the literal smartest people in the room were utilizing their teams in that way. There's something in Silicon Valley we call the hippo effect, which is the highest individually paid person's opinion. Once that's expressed, a lot of times creativity and innovation leaves the room because everyone just agrees with the boss. All their jokes are good and all their ideas are funny. But the leaders that I worked for did the opposite. In fact, they built in operational systems to prevent the hippo effect. And they drew out those academic debates, those dissenting voices. They encouraged it. And so honestly, I saw it modeled around me, and I just tried to replicate that leadership style in my own tiny version of my own little projects and how I could display that in my own career. And then later, as I became a leader and now as a founder, I can do that on a bigger stage. But yeah.
What challenge are you seeing that leaders that you work with and talk to and getting feedback from your book that they're most up against, that you're kind of like, ooh, I never thought about this, or two, okay, this is what I walk through some of those experiences?
I mean, it's really hard to be a founder right now, honestly, because there's so much exhaustion. We've had to go into survival mode, which was its own set of blueprints and best practices. And that was kind of more a compartmentalized sprint. It ended up being a much longer sprint than any of us originally, planned our energy resources for. Then we had to get into this reset where we were kind of, all right, let's take in the data. Let's see how the world has pivoted. How can we optimize? And a lot of wonderful efficiencies and advancements have come out of that. It's been so inspiring to see people who've leaned into the opportunity to shake up their best practices have been so much better off on the other side of the pandemic than they would have been otherwise, or at least accelerated their progress 10 years in what we did in 2 years. So, but the real struggle now is a lot of this fatigue. High performers especially, we're super fatigued. We are having a hard time. We feel emotional overwhelm. Okay, I'm talking about myself right now. I can stop saying we. I have moments.
So let's talk about Anne.
Let's do some therapy.
Did this turn into therapy? Exactly right.
Can we get
I'd love
to know.
Can we
get the therapist on the line? No, it's really about that. It's such a gift. This is what I have realized it's such a gift to be able to re-examine our values, our mission, our impact in the world, to think about what tribe have I curated around myself and how can I utilize that in a new and efficient way. And that is what I see shared among high performers, in my clients, in my peers, is this desire to truly align ourselves, really get down to the core of what is my living legacy. I think we've all come to appreciate that we have no idea where the finish line is in this beautiful gift of our singular life. And now having the attitude of today is my living legacy, how I spend my time, my resources, my money, my influence. If I did an audit today of those things, could people then reverse engineer what my values are? And that I think is beautiful. It's really hard, gut-wrenching work when you have those conversations with yourself because you're realizing that some of our old habits no longer serve us and, deserve to be outside. But it's so empowering and beautiful once we get to that space. But I have found that to be exhausting work and so worth it.
I think there's a thought there that, again, from a generational point of view, is we now better understand that dichotomy between what people do at work and what they do at home. And now we're understanding, if you're not holistic, I don't want to follow you.
Yes.
And I think that's been this changing of the guard, and it's bringing on this change to say, what values are you saying, and then what values are you acting, and they better be in accordance. And if you have no idea what values, or we haven't discussed those, as I've learned, the values are the foundation of leadership. And we can have different values. We could have different value level, but if we have the conversation about the values, as I found, then we end up having a relatability to where I can accept that your values are different, but now I know about it, and we've had this open discussion. And I think in leadership, in organizations, that ability to do so, hinging back to what you said, is what is this holistic leader as a person? How am I looking at that? How am I staying on top of that? But not only just about me.
Yeah.
What am I doing for Anne? What am I doing for, Charlie? What am I doing for Mary? What am I doing for, Jennifer? What am I doing for them? Because if I'm not looking out for them, as we've seen, our organization won't go very far. Because if they're not bought in, and if we're not willing to navigate through these potholes at times, then we have nothing.
It's so true. I was just reflecting on how even just at Google over the last 20 years, I think they're literally 20 years old or 19 years old now. In the beginning, it was very much about hiring for culture alignment. But when you hire for culture alignment, you get a bunch of 20-year-old white guys who all come from the same privileged background, right? We don't have that diversity, which adds that fortifies you for the long haul. In the beautiful shift in how they've changed not only the way they hire, but incentivize and are more purpose-driven in creating a pipeline of talent that has been underrepresented in the past, like owning their ability to influence that has been so beautiful. And now we see the shift. Instead of hiring for culture alignment, they're hiring for what you just described, which is mission alignment, which is passion alignment. We can have different core individual values, and that's really can be a strength. If we come from different cultural influences or family or societal expectations, you're going to have different drive. You're going to ask different questions. You're going to lean in at different moments than the person next to you. That's a group that's stronger together than apart. And I think that is what I love seeing so many corporations that are going to survive this crazy experience we've just been through. They are the ones who are leaning into that. Those that really dig in and they stay within that safety bubble. Ironically, counterintuitively, they're the ones that are going to burn out, because so many of us, okay, again, I in the pandemic had this instinct to curl up into a little ball of my safety zone of here's what I know how to do well. I'm just going to stick with this until this whole madness blows over. And then those who stayed in that little safety bubble too long, you start to fatigue because you've stripped yourself of everything that has meaning, which is learning, which comes through mistakes, which comes through growth, which comes from trying things that you don't know how to do perfectly. And those that are going to survive and come out stronger on the other side have started reinserting this into their work and their life and even their social circles. I mean, it takes some examination of literally even the social media that we're consuming right now. Like, think about, we've all heard the saying that we're the average of the 5 people we spend most of the time with. Social media is a big percentage of most people's lives. And so be really careful of curating a tribe around us that lifts us up, makes us feel better about ourselves instead of by comparison of this false perfection that is out there on social media and feeling bad about ourselves. Let's recharge and rejuvenate through that passion and mission alignment.
I love it. And that's something that I see, and I think there's a great opportunity for us to help people through that process, because it's a process that we've either had to do personally and or walk through with others, but then we see kind of the carnage in society from not.
Yeah.
And it's a great test to, this is what happens when you do curl up in a ball, as opposed to this is where you open your arms and saying, hey, I don't know the answers, but who can I link arms with, and let's figure this out together. Yeah. And to me, those are the big descriptive, visions of a healthy leader compared to an unhealthy leader. Is the one that curls up in the ball. I have this all figured out. I have to be, cold hard. You're not going to win. You're going to be broken down. Everyone around you is. It's the ones that are like, let's go. Let's figure this out.
Yeah.
Help me. I'll help you. Let's go.
I think you're so right. Those leaders who really showed up in full authenticity, especially early in this madness, have really earn the respect of their team. I'm thinking about one client in particular, Matt, and his family was going through un-COVID related major health crisis. His daughter was very, very ill. He hadn't really shared that with the company. It happened right before the pandemic happened. She got her diagnosis. So he was in a vulnerable place already. Then this happened where his company needed him to be more than fully present to, how are we going to survive this, let alone thrive in the long run? And he just, in one of our consulting sessions, he's like, how am I going to stand on stage tomorrow during our team, like all hands, and project any kind of confidence that I know how we're going to survive this? I don't know. And I said, say that. Tell them where you're coming from. Say, I don't know, but here's what I'm going to base my decisions on. These are the markers that I am watching for as indicators that our efforts are well spent, that our revenue is okay, that we're making the best use of our limited runway that we have. And he stood up on stage and shared that. And then he hadn't expected to, but he shared what was going on in his family as well. And his entire company rallied in a way that I literally have goosebumps right now thinking about how that went.
You and I both.
It's such a powerful moment as a leader to show a bit of vulnerability. He didn't make them think that no one's manning the ship. He said, I've got these eyes on these markers that are going to indicate if all our efforts are paying off, and I'm going to know early if it's not working, and we're going to pivot. But here, I just don't know what those answers are yet, but I'm on it. And they just came together full force, and they are just an incredible powerhouse as a company now, 2.5 years later. It's beautiful.
It's a true testament. Is the thing that scares us the most is uncertainty.
Yeah.
And if we can have clarity, even in uncertainty, we have clarity, and we can rally behind that and say, let's figure it out. We have that grit. We have that tenacity. We just need something to unlock it and align it with. Anne, it's getting late tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I truly appreciated it. I'm excited for people to get your book. It's now available in Europe as well. And I'm so thankful that you took the opportunity to write it and share your story and really use it as a lesson for people to yearn for something greater in themselves and to use as a guideline and a guidebook.
Thank you, Tyler.
I think there's also a workbook.
There
right?
is. Thank you. Yeah. So while this book is written as yes, it is full of like crazy fun stories from the foundation of the internet and the version 1.0 of these now celebrity CEOs. And it is like a fun read that you can plow through literally in a day. What it matters to me most is that this is translatable into challenges and best practices that you can apply today. So I've literally written an accompanying workbook. We'll give you like literal downloads of having that promotion conversation or writing your own mission, vision, and value statements. And so, yes, I hope everyone will check it out. All the details are on the book's website, which is betonyourselfbook.com. But I really want to thank you for inviting me. And also, I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. with whatever that light bulb moment was that I couldn't come back to.
Once you do, let me know and we will share
Thank you. Okay, I will. Thank you very much. This was fun.
Thank you, Anne.